Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the GCC Reseller Business School podcast. My name is Isa. I am a designer reseller, a business consultant, a builder of brands, mother of Chanelia, and this is my new venture. Today's episode is called The Intro, the Why, and a Big Corporate America Lesson Learned. I want you to know why the podcast, why now, how it will be different, my intention with it, and I will finish off with a big lesson I was forced to learn in my retail buying days. I will tell you about the time I almost got fired because of tangled necklaces, and how an old jeweler's trick has helped me build the Global Collective into what it is today. So let's jump in. Let's start with the questions. Why the podcast and why now? Well, this has actually been on my mind for years. As in 3 years to be exact. The first podcast I ever did was with my Italian sister, Daniela, who you would know as Ivy and Blush on Instagram, or from the wonderful Thrifters Villa podcast. I've been a guest on many times, and our episodes go long, because, well, that's what happened when you give a Mexicana and an Italiana a microphone and no word limit. When we did that first interview, though, it was March 2020, and the world was in a complete and total meltdown. The world had closed, my flight back to Germany had been canceled indefinitely, and I would not be allowed to go back or see Marco for almost 6 months. I did end up getting locked up with my mom in Mexico City, and Marco ended up getting locked up with his dad in Germany, so it was actually a blessing in disguise that happened that way. Otherwise, our parents would have been locked up alone. I ended up having an amazing bonding time with Mama, which completely transformed our relationship from good to amazing. But still, it was one of the most challenging times in my adult life. I don't think Daniela knows how much that interview meant to me. It was a distraction, something else to focus on that wasn't darkness or sadness, and that interview sparked something in me. It was during that lockdown that I started with authentications and then later the consultations that would lead to my course. See, my business thrived from day one. I recovered most of my initial investment from the first month in business, and from there, it was just pure profit multiplying itself. I could not keep certain items in stock, but then the lockdown hit, and you know what people really don't need when they can't leave their home? Designer bags and shoes. There's no use in buying $500 shoes if no one's going to see them. Who will you show them off to? So as the saying goes, the music just stopped abruptly. I'm not saying that the sales completely died. I'm just saying that it was a big change from the kind of sales that were happening before the global shutdown. I had cash in the bank. I had absolutely no expenses except some groceries at Mom's, so the money wasn't an issue, as much as the sadness with everything happening plus being away from Marco. After that interview with Daniela, something inside me changed. I decided that I had been given the gift of time. If designer goods weren't the answer right now, I would figure something else out to dedicate my time to. It was then I started working on the authentication service. People had always asked me about my designer flips and how I knew things to be authentic. I had a lot of experience with designer and my own strategies on how to prove authenticity, so I started shifting my content from just product, which my Insta used to be a storefront, that's it. And then I switched to education and information for resellers. Long story short, I started offering authentication services during 2020, and that business took off immediately. It gave me something to do. It was making money, and I was stuck indoors anyway, so I had time. Plus, I learned a lot. Now, from those authentications, I started getting people reaching out to me with questions that were more specific to business and management. I started getting more and more questions about how I run the business, so I decided to start a consultation service. That took off right away too. People had seen what I had done with the store, and as I shared more information about my past experience and corporate background, people started trusting me more and more and opening up about their business hangups. Then I did a podcast with Christina from Poshing Together. I don't think she podcasts anymore, but that was another opportunity to get my voice out there and start sharing more information and my experience with people. I was finally allowed to fly into Europe at the end of summer 2020, and I was reunited with Marco after all that time. It was all still kind of bad. The business was still rocky as far as designer sales, but the service side of the business was pulling some heavy weight. In November of 2020, I did a podcast with Denali from El Ducho Thrift, who I also love and respect. And it was after that conversation that I was like, wow, this was really fun. I should start a podcast someday. Because, I love to talk to people, to walls, whatever. It seemed like something I'd be good at. But 2020 felt like the year of the podcasts and the courses in the reseller world. And it just didn't feel like it was the right time. And you know what? I am forever grateful that I held off as long as I did. Instead of diving into a podcast or a course, I went much deeper into the individual business consultations. And I really believe that made all the difference. I needed to do those consultations. The course would have never turned out to be the huge success it was and has been if it hadn't been for those 275 people that allowed me to dig deep into their businesses and find the common denominators, the common issues most resellers face. So again, I'm really glad that I didn't jump into Course Mania of 2020. I had a chance to really build on my experience and understand the consumer before I built a single lesson. I feel like I'm in a much better place now. The business has grown exponentially in the last 3 years, and I feel like I have a lot more to offer you from this point than where I was 3 years ago. So now let's get into my intention with the podcast. I want to share as much free information and personal experiences as possible. I make good money flipping designer. The course is quite lucrative, and so is the dashboard. Now, the course is absolutely amazing. It's my masterpiece, and I think it's worth 10 times more than what I'm charging for it. You can go ahead and click the hundreds of testimonials to confirm my statement. But it is an investment. I don't know if most people will be willing to dive into it right away, so I wanted to offer an extra tool for anyone that isn't in the place to make that investment yet. I don't think this will be a substitute for the information in there, but I think it can be a stepping stone from wherever you are in your business now towards the kind of business you would like to build. I want this to be a space dedicated to helping anyone who wants to build a better business, a better life, work less, but more intentionally, build wealth, and help themselves and others into the next level. I will be very intentional with who I bring on as a guest and what we discuss. I want this to be entertaining for sure, but I want education and information at the forefront. I know we are facing some hard economics times right now, and I hate to burst your bubble, but I really don't think we're out of the woods yet. I tell my course students this all the time in our mentorship calls. I think things will get worse before they get better. And then we're heading into an election year, which we all know is going to cause even more turbulence. I don't say this to scare you, though. I actually think there's huge opportunity during these troubling times, but you need to be prepared. And I hope that this podcast will help you do that. I truly believe that it is during the challenging and hard times that we learn the most important life lessons. And I would like to share an experience I had when I was 25 that completely changed the way I see difficult times. This may seem silly to others, but it was a time in my life where I was young, I had absolutely no money saved, I lived paycheck to paycheck. Losing my job was not exactly an option. So let me tell you about the time I was almost fired because of tangled necklaces and how life gave me the missing piece of the puzzle and saved me via an old jeweler's trick. So let's go back a solid 13 years to my days as a retail buyer. This was one of my absolute favorite jobs, but also one of the most challenging jobs I ever had. The person I worked for was tough, to say the very, very least. It was almost unbearable. Or so I thought back then. But it was one of those situations where it was such a strong company and brand at that time that if you worked there for a year or so, you could probably go work many other places. A lot of doors were open. And the contacts we had available to us at that time were invaluable. So I decided to deal with the way things were because I wanted that on my resume. Now, my direct boss was the owner, and he was tough, very tough. Like Devil Wears Prada tough. And back then, I wondered why he was like that. why he would challenge us the way he did. And even though my growth might have not been his intention, he's the person that taught me the most about myself and life and my abilities. So I thank him. I really do. I wish I could run into him and tell him that I was able to get through many obstacles in my life because of the things I learned working there. Problem solving became my number one specialty. He forced me to get real quick thinking on my feet. This story I'm going to tell you is not the only time he challenged me that way. It was one of many, but the lesson I learned this time on that day has stayed with me forever. I think about it often, and I would like to share it with you today in hopes that it will help you when you feel like you're backed up against a wall and there's nowhere to turn. So I was a retail buyer for this company, which was an incredible reach for someone so young without a college degree or any prior experience in buying. I will share with you how I got the job on another episode, but for now, let's just say that sometimes you have to shoot your shot, even if you think it's ridiculous, because it might just make it into the net by some sort of divine or magical intervention. We were opening up a new boutique, and I was in charge of all the beauty products and gifting, like candles and all those tchotchkes. I was supposed to meet the owner and the buying team at the store, the new one, because the contractors were setting up my area and I had to tell them where I wanted the shelving and the fixtures, all that stuff. I was asked by the women's buyer, since I lived closer to the big store, if I would bring over some necklaces she forgot. I said yes. I stopped by the store. Someone handed me a package. I put the package on the passenger seat and then I left. When I got to the new store, I ran into the owner. He asked me about the necklaces, and I gave him the necklaces. That was that. The second he started opening the package, I saw the look on his face, and I knew that something was terribly off. As he started to pull everything out of the package, some genius had decided to throw hundreds of really hair-thin little charm necklaces into a big plastic bag. Well, all of those hair-thin necklaces got tangled somewhere in transit, maybe even before packing, to be honest. That didn't look like it happened on the way there. And they became a giant ball of metal. I could not believe the massive knot that he was holding up. It looked really scary. And so did his face. He said something along the lines of like, why would somebody think it's a good idea to transport necklaces this way? And I said, I was just handed the package to bring. I never even looked inside. Well, somehow this all quickly became my fault. I can't really remember the specifics that he used to unleash his anger, but at the end he became very calm, kind of strange calm, and he said, here's what's going to happen. We're all going to go to lunch, so the buying team, and you're going to stay here and figure this out. And if those necklaces are still tangled by the time we come back, you're gone. So, fired. Now at this point, I was pretty much at my wit's end at this job. I wanted to quit so bad, but I needed the job and it was good for my resume, blah, blah, blah. I had struggled with the idea, but I had decided to stick it out until I found a great new job. Except I kind of hated my life. And then he put my job on the line. And my first thought was, oh my God, F this. I hope he fires me. Great. It's my ticket out. I'll get unemployment and I can buy some time to figure out my next move. F it. This isn't my fault. I'm not going to be talked to this way because of someone else's decision. Da 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 da. My ego started going 100 miles per hour, and honestly, I was ready to let him fire me and just take the easy way out. And then something absolutely magical happened. One of the girls that was going to work as a cashier at the new store came up to me after they had all left, and she said, "Hey, I heard what happened." And I was like, great, this is even more embarrassing now. And she said, well, this is going to sound crazy, but I know a little trick that's going to get those necklaces untangled in minutes. My mom owns a jewelry store and she has a trick that she taught me. You guys, my jaw dropped. I was ready to admit defeat. I was ready to just give up and take the easy way out of what seemed like an impossible situation. And then here comes this girl out of nowhere claiming she has an immediate solution to the problem. I had to take it. I couldn't let him win. The universe, life, God, goddess, whatever you subscribe to was giving me a lifeline. I had to take it. So I was like, okay, I'm in. How do we do this? And she said, I just need 2 safety pins. Guys, I don't think you can really imagine the nightmare this giant ball of wire was. It really looked impossible. While people were trying to find the pins, I tried to do it by hand, and it was literally not moving. Nothing was moving. And then another associate came back with 2 safety pins she had taken from women's tags in the back. This is one of the wildest things I've seen to this day. The girl took the 2 safety pins, stuck them on the opposite ends of the chain ball, kind of close to the edges, but a little bit of margin. And then she started to ever so softly rattle the pins. And then the necklaces started slipping out one by one as if they had oil on them. She rattled the necklaces until they stopped coming out, and then she would readjust the pins and start over again, and they kept falling. We had untangled the entire thing within 10 minutes. We placed all the necklaces next to each other on a velvet display board, and I took the girl to lunch, and then we came back. When the owner came back from lunch, he saw us kind of joking around the cash wrap and laughing, but he couldn't see the necklaces yet. When he got close enough to see all of the necklaces perfectly placed in their spot, his face completely changed. It was part shock and part trying to act like he wasn't incredibly impressed. He never said anything else about them after that day, and he started treating me better. I don't think he ever thought I would be able to pull it off, and honestly, neither did I. But in the stressful, impossible moment, there was a key through that girl and safety pins to get out of the challenge and win. I think about that moment and that girl often, especially when I'm in a tough situation with my back against the wall and things seem impossible. I always think of the safety pins and how there must be a hidden option out of this current mess. I think about how incredibly easy the solution was to what seemed like a massive problem once I had the right tools and the know-how. But I would have never been able to get out of that mess alone. I had to learn the lesson through that girl and the jeweler's trick her mom taught her. There was always a way out, or at least through the hard times. You just need to be open to the possibilities, open to help and the signs that life will be sending you. You need to be willing to wait for the solution and not just take the easy way out, which is to quit. And I know that seems like the only option sometimes, especially now when sales are slow and you're wondering if this is the right move, if you should be doing this, if maybe you're the problem. And that's where you have to kind of remember this example. There is a way out. You just have to figure out what it is. The easiest thing is to quit. It is. You just stop. You don't have to deal with it anymore. But if you are able to get through, so many other doors will open. So many other things will happen that wouldn't if you just stop. And that's one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned. You can't just quit. And the other thing is, I think we kind of undervalue the lessons we learn through these times. I mean, I am forever grateful for that job and for that moment and for that girl because it was just so eye-opening to see that happen. It was such an amazing, it actually happened, but it's also such a great metaphor for everything I've been through in life. It's something that's going to stick with me forever because we're going to go through a lot of times in our life where we feel like there's no way out. Like everything seems like that giant knotted mess of necklaces. And if you just try to peel them one by one with your hand, you'd never get it done. That's not the right solution. It would take you hours, you would get frustrated, and then in the end, you wouldn't get the result you need because that's not the solution you're looking for. So you got to make sure also that when you're problem solving, You're putting your energy towards the best course of action. Because if that girl wasn't there and she didn't exist, and I tried to go at it alone with my bare hands, right? The hour would have passed by, the necklaces would still be a mess, I would be completely frustrated, and I would have gotten fired. Or maybe he was just trying to threaten me that way, but he would always hold that over my head. It's not the time invested into these problems that's making sure that you've got the right solution, the best solution. She solved the problem with minimal stress, minimal effort, and the silliest tools because she had the know-how, because she had a strategy to work through that knot. So I want you guys to remember that, because like I said, we're all going to face harder times, not just because of the economy. I mean, in general, shit happens. But I want you to remember those three things: that there is always a solution to the problem, that there is a solution to the problem that requires the least amount of intensity and work and stress, but you need to know the right tools, and that you should always stay open to help, to advice, because you never know when those keys that people give you, those little pieces of advice, you never know what door they're going to unlock. So you might as well just keep them, because one day you're going to be like, oh, I remember that one thing that one girl said. That kind of applies to this. I wonder if that's going to solve this problem. Click, opens the door. So I really hope that you guys liked my little story. This wraps up our very first episode together. I hope you enjoyed it, and you stay tuned for the next episode where I'll be talking about a taboo subject. Coincidentally, one of my favorite subjects: money mindset and management. If you like this episode, please like it, share it, comment on it, whatever people do with podcasts. And make sure to save the podcast to your favorites so that you're notified of new episode releases. Thank you, and I will see you very soon. If you liked this episode and are listening to this podcast on YouTube, make sure to hit the like button. This will help my new little project reach a bigger audience. And don't forget to subscribe. You're going to be notified immediately of any new releases.